for chapter 23 of our text. Alright, so let me get into the chapter. Chapter 23 says, "A rooster crowed at the next morning's dawn. I peeked into Tantati's room. Her bed was still made without a wrinkle on it. She had not come home at all the night before. My grandmother made herself some bitter black coffee with a lump of salt to prepare her body for the shock of bad news. I sat out on the porch with Bridget, waiting for the food vendors to come by. They trickled by slowly, each chanting the name and praises of their merchandise. My grandmother bought some bananas, boiled eggs, and hard biscuits. Louise and Tantati came up the road. Tantati was ahead. Louise marched a few feet behind her. My grandmother looked up without acknowledging their presence. Louise walked into the yard, charged towards the tree, untied her pig, picked it up, and walked away. "Why? What are you doing?" I called after her. She did not turn back. "What is the matter with her?" I asked Tantati. "Mama told her to come get the pig or she would kill it," Tantati said. Tantati was carrying a small jar of water with 3 leeches inside. "Is it true, Grandma? Did you say that?" I asked. "We need a pig, we buy a pig," said my grandmother. "I will buy it," I said. No, Tantati jumped up quickly. "The money, it will surely go for her boat trip to Miami." "You think you can keep money out of her hands?" asked my grandmother. "I do not want to push her into the ocean," Tantati said. She raised the leech jar towards the sun. The animals squirmed away from the light, their black slippery bodies coiling into small balls. She raised her skirt and stretched out her calf. Opening the jar, she tipped it over so that the water was soaking her skin. The leeches slowly crawled out of the jar and climbed on a lump on her calf. She ground her teeth when one of the larger leeches bit into her skin. She leaned back against the porch railing, pulled her notebook from her sack, and began writing her name. She wrote it over and over, following a pattern at the top of the page. The leeches sucked the blood out of her lump until they were plump and full. She pulled them away one by one, slid her finger down their backs, and pumped the blood into an empty jar. I felt my head spinning, my stomach about to turn inside out. Tantati noticed the pained expression on my face. "It's no loss, Angel," she said. "It's only blood, bad blood at that." I asked my grandmother if I could cook supper for us that night. Tantati offered to take me to a private vendor where food was cheaper than the mashi. She put the leeches in some clean water and we started down the road. "What are you making for us?" she asked. "Rice, black beans, and herring sauce," I said. Your mother's favorite meal." "That's what we cooked most often." We followed a footpath off the road down to a shallow stream. An old mule was yanking vines from the edge of the stream while baby crabs freely dashed around its nostrils. A woman filled a calabash a few feet away from where my sandals muddied the water. Tantati chatted with the women as she went by. Some young girls were sitting bare-chested in the water, the sun casting darker shadows into their faces. Their hands squirted blackened suds as they pounded their clothes on water rocks. A dusty footpath led us to a tree-lined cemetery at the top of the hill. Tantati walked between the wooden crosses, collecting the bamboo skeletons of fallen kites. She stepped around the plots where empty jars, conch shells, and marbles served as grave markers. Walk straight, said Tanta T. You are in the presence of family. She walked around each plot and called out the names of all those who had been buried there. There is my great grandmother, beloved Martinelle Bridget, her sister, my first joy, Sophilus Gentile, my grandfather's sister, my hope, Athenia Ive, and finally my grandfather, Charlemagne le Grand Caco. Tanta T named them all on sight. Our family name Caco. It is the name of a scarlet bird, a bird so crimson it makes the reddest hibiscus or the brightest flame tree seem white. The caco bird, when it dies, there is always a rush of blood that rises to its neck and the wings. They look so bright you would think them on fire. From the cemetery, we took a narrow footpath to the vendor's hut. On each side of us were wild grasses that hissed as though they were full of snakes. We walked to a whitewashed shack where a young woman sold rice and black beans from the same sisal mat where she slept with her husband. In the yard, the husband sat under the shade of a straw parasol with a pipe in his mouth and a demijohn at his feet. He was pounding small nails into leather straps and thin layers of polished wood to make sandals. The hammering echoed in my head until I reached the cane fields. The men were singing about a woman who flew without her skin at night, and when she came back home, she found her skin peppered and could not put it back on. Her husband had done it to teach her a lesson. He ended up killing her. I was surprised how fast it came back. The memory of how everything came together to make a great meal. The fragrance of the spices guided my fingers the way no instructions or measurements could. Or men, they insist that their women are virgins and have their 10 fingers. According to Tanta T, each finger had a purpose. It was the way she had been taught to prepare herself to become a woman. Mothering, boiling, loving, baking, nursing, frying, healing, washing, ironing, scrubbing. It wasn't her fault, she said. Her 10 fingers had been named for her even before she was born. Sometimes she wished she had 6 fingers on each hand so she could have 2 left for herself. I rushed back and forth between the iron pots in the yard. The air smelled like spices that I had not cooked with since I'd left my mother's home 2 years before. I usually ate random concoctions, frozen dinners, samples from global cookbooks, food that was easy to put together and brought me no pain. No memories of a past that at times was cherished and at other times despised. By the time we ate, the air was pregnant with rain. Thunder groaned in the starless sky while the lanterns flickered in the hills. Well done, Tanta T said after her 4th serving of my rice and beans. My grandmother chewed slowly as she gave my daughter her bottle. If the wood is well carved, said my grandmother, it teaches us about the carpenter. Atty, you taught Sophie well. Tanta T was taken off guard by my grandmother's compliment. She kissed me on the forehead before taking the dishes to the yard to wash. Then, when she went into the house, took her notebook and left for her lesson with Louise. My grandmother groaned her disapproval. She pulled out a small pouch and packed pinches of tobacco powder into her nose. She inhaled deeply, stuffing more and more into her nostrils. She had a deep look of concern on her face as her eyes surveyed the evening clouds. Tandy, do you hear anything? She asked. There was nothing but the usual night sounds. Birds finding their ways in the dark as they shuffled through the leaves. Often at night, there were women who traveled long distances on foot or on mare to save the car fare to Port-au-Prince. I strained my eyes to see beyond the tree shadows on the road. There is a girl going home, my grandmother said. You cannot see her. She is far away, quite far. It is not the distance that is important. If I hear a girl from far away, there is an emotion, something that calls to my soul. If your soul is linked with someone, somehow you can always feel when something is happening to them. Is it Tanta T, the girl on the road? None. It is really a girl, a young woman. Is the girl in danger? That's why you listen. You should hear young feet crushing wet leaves. Her feet make a swish swash when they hit the ground, and when she hurries, it sounds like a whip chasing a mule. I listened closely, but heard no whip. When it is dark, all men are black, she said. There is no way to know anything unless you apply your ears. When you listen, it's come see. You had deafness before, and you can hear now. Sometimes you can't fall asleep because the sound of someone crying keeps you awake. A whisper sounds like a roar to your ears. Your ears are witness to matters that do not concern you. And what is worse, you cannot forget. Now listen. Her feet make a swish sound, and when she hurries, it sounds like a whip in the wind. I tried, but I heard no whip. It's the way old men cry, she said. Grown, brave men have a special way they cry when they are afraid. She closed her eyes and lowered her head to concentrate. It is Tearless. Who is Tearless? The young child in the bushes. It is Tearless. Someone is there with her. Is she in danger? My grandmother tightened her eyelids. I know Tearless, she said. I know her mother. Why is she in the bushes? She must be 14 or 15 years now. Why is she out there? She is rushing back to her mother. She was with a friend, a boy. I thought I heard a few hushed whispers. I think I hear a little, I said, rocking my daughter with excitement. Tearless and the boy, they are bidding one another goodbye for the night. My grandmother wrapped her arms around her body, rocking and cradling herself. What is happening now? I asked. Her mother is waiting for her at the door of their hut. She's pulling her inside to test her. The word sent a chill through my body. She's going to test to see if young Alice is still a virgin, my grandmother said. The mother, she will drag her inside the hut, take the last small finger and put it inside her to see if it goes in. You said the other night that your mother tested you. That is what is now happening to Tearless. I have heard it compared to a virginity cult, our mother's obsession with keeping us pure and chaste. My mother always listened to the echo of my urine in the toilet, for if it is too loud, it meant that I had been deflowered. I learned very early in life that virgin always took small steps when they walked. They never did acrobatic splits, never rode horses or bicycles. They always covered themselves well, and even if their lives depended on it, never parted with their panties. The story goes that there was once an extremely rich man who married a poor black girl. He had chosen her out of hundreds of prettier girls because She was untouched. For the wedding night, he bought her the whitest sheets and nightgowns he could possibly find. For himself, he bought a can of thick goat milk in which he planned to sprinkle a drop of her hymen blood to drink. Then came their wedding night. The girl did not bleed. The man had his honor and reputation to defend. He could not face a town if he did not have a blood-spotted sheet to hang in his courtyard the next morning. He did the best he could to make her bleed, but no matter how hard he tried, the girl did not bleed. So he took a knife and cut her between her legs to get some blood to show. He got enough blood for her wedding gown and sheets, an unusual amount to impress the neighbors. The blood kept flowing like water out of the girl. It flowed so much it wouldn't stop. Finally, drained of all her blood, the girl died. Later, during her funeral procession, her blood-soaked sheets were paraded by her husband to show she had been a virgin on her wedding night. At the gravesite, her husband drank his blood-spotted goat milk and cried like a child. I closed my eyes upon the images of my mother slipping her hand under the sheets and poking her pinky at a void, hoping that it would go no further than the length of her fingernail. Like Tante T, she had told me stories while she was doing it, weaving elaborate tales to keep my mind off the finger, which I knew one day would slip into me and condemn me. I had learned to double while being tested. I would close my eyes and imagine all the pleasant things that I had known. The lukewarm noon breeze through our bougainvillea, Tante T's gentle voice blowing over a field of daffodils. There were many stories about our ancestors having doubled. It was said that most of our presidents had actually been split in two, part flesh and part shadow. That was the only way they could murder and rape so many people and still go home to play with their children and make love to their wives. After my marriage, whenever Joseph and I were together, I doubled. The testing, why do the mothers do that? I asked my grandmother. If a child dies, you do not die. But if your child is disgraced, you are disgraced. And people, they think daughters will be raised trash with no man in the house. Did your mother do this to you? From the time a girl begins to menstruate to the time you turn her over to her husband, the mother is responsible for her purity. If I give a soiled daughter to her husband, he can shame my family, speak evil of me, even bring her back to me. When you tested my mother and Tante T, couldn't you tell that they hated it? I had to keep them clean until they had husbands. But they don't have husbands. The burden was not mine alone. I hated the tests, I said. It is the most horrible thing that ever happened to me. When my husband is with me now, it gives me such nightmares that I have to bite my tongue to do it again. With patience, it goes away. No, Grammy Ife, it does not. Tearless, she passed her examination. The sky reddened with a sudden flash of lightning. Now you have a child of your own. You must know that everything a mother does, she does for her child's own good. You cannot always carry the pain. You must liberate yourself. We walked to my room and put my daughter down to sleep. I will go soon, I told my grandmother, back to my husband. It is better. It is hard for a woman to raise girls alone. She walked into her room, took her statue of Urzule, and pressed it into my hand. My heart, it weeps like a river for the pain we have caused you. I held the statue against my chest as I cried in the night. I thought I heard my grandmother crying too, but it was the rain slowing down to a mere drizzle, tapping on the roof. The next morning, I went jogging along the road, through the cemetery plot and into the hills. The sun had already dried some of the puddles from the drizzle the night before. Along the way, people stared at me with puzzled expressions on their faces. Is this what happens to our girls when they leave this place? They become such frightened creatures that they run like the wind from nothing at all. Thank you for joining me once again. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. If you have not already done so, please like, share, subscribe to my channel, and give me a thumbs up. If there are any comments, leave them in the comment section. See you again soon. Bye.